I am honored today. Welcome, everyone. I'm honored today to welcome Sybil Allen to our podcast, WIL Talk. And Sybil, thank you so much for joining us. We're fortunate to have you and to have some great conversation today. I hope we can fit everything in within an hour.
Yeah.
Nice to have you here.
Yes. Well, thank you, Vicki. I'm very happy to be here on this gorgeous day in Toronto, and spring is definitely here, and trying to mimic the colors of nature today.
Yes, you've done very well. You're very bright and cheerful, so thank you. So I want to take a moment and just introduce you to our audience in case they didn't have a chance to, see your profile. So Sybil is the CEO of The Human Factor. And, what I love about Sybil, she's got this amazing background in master's degree in clinical and medical social work, as well as a doctorate in philosophy, social and organizational psychology. And she has built this amazing company. Sorry, we got somebody popping in. She has built this amazing company, again, like I said, The Human Factor, where her mission is actually about dismantling those systemic barriers. Those barriers are created by structures of oppression embedded in organizations with white dominant values. And those systems are very entrenched. And we're going to spend some time today speaking to that. She also has a singular purpose to increase joy, dignity, and respect for all. And I've been fortunate enough to have some great conversations with Sybil through the last couple of years, actually. And I always leave those conversations learning more and just, feeling like I have a better appreciation and understanding for humanity in total. So today we're really excited to jump in and just have some conversation around courageous conversations and what that looks and feels like. So again, Sybil, welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. And I'm just going to jump right in so that we can, start the conversation. Just as a reminder, for those of you who just joined, we will take questions toward the end, but we'll spend the first 30 minutes just, really getting into some of the things that Sybil is going to share with us. And then we'll get more into the questions that you have. Feel free, if something comes up that's pertinent right at that moment, put it in the chat and I'll be happy to answer it. So, Sybil, let's get into, how we actually build capacity for those courageous conversations and how systemic barriers might be coming into play for that.
So I just want to start by saying next Tuesday, May 25th, 2 weeks, will be the day that George Floyd was killed. And so, we are in a current moment of reckoning with race around the world. And, it seems like a lifetime, actually, but it's just almost a year where things kind of broke open in ways that it hadn't for a long time. We've had other, decades of civil rights movements and other, activities and opportunities for change, but this has been a period of reckoning. The Black Lives Matter movement is now a global movement, and as of July of 2020, it has been considered to be the largest movement in U.S. history. During this period, between 15 and 26 million people in America participated in protests in the whole country, corners of the country that have never ever protested or marched for anything. Wow. And I think that says a lot, because I think we have now turned a corner, I hope, and we all hope, and we're always hopeful, but vigilant as well, that, people are, there's a period of vulnerability that has also opened up with the other pandemic of COVID, where people have had time to reflect and to really take stock of their own personal values and to see things maybe through lenses that they hadn't before. So with that vulnerability, people losing their jobs, people maybe for the first time worried about paying rent or food, where they've never had those opportunities before, that maybe there is an opening, a portal. That's how I feel, and how this is my own theory, about how this may be playing into what we're seeing. And I just want to, mention the three women, and it's women who started Black Lives Matter. And queer women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Culture, and Opal Tometi, the ladies. And I think it's something that, it's incredible what has been created as a result of that. And essentially, it's around recognizing our humanity and recognizing what we need to be working on in terms of diversity and inclusion. Elon Musk, and I know he's a controversial person, but so am I, on a recent podcast was asked, what words of encouragement would you give an entrepreneur? And his response was, if you need words of encouragement, don't become an entrepreneur. I would like to expand this analogy really to leadership, because I feel like it takes courage as a leader to do the right thing. And sometimes you have to do things that people don't like, but it takes courage to do that. And it's important, especially when we're talking about equity seeking initiatives, that you have that courage and you have that backbone. And I think that daring leaders, and that's what you will have to be as an entrepreneur or someone in a senior leadership role, you should never be silent about things that are hard things. And you should never be silent about things that impact people's humanity, And if you don't have passion for people, then I don't think that you should be leading people in business. And I think that's one of the issues, is we often have people in leadership roles who really don't necessarily care about people, and certainly don't have a passion for people, and maybe don't have a passion for change. Mm-hmm. So that's problematic.
That's actually just sorry on that point. That's a really great point. And those aren't really leaders. Those are people who have their own agenda. And so they miss that aspect of the engagement of all voices, all people, and the humanity aspect of it. Sorry, I just had to throw that in because I think that's such a pivotal point that you just made, and people don't realize the responsibility of a leader. And so walk into that role thinking, oh, it's all, all good and smells good, looks good, but there's a lot of heart that has to come with that leadership. Sorry to interrupt you, Sybil.
Yeah, no, and it's also it's not just about the bottom line. Like, it's about the people who contribute to that bottom line and how you treat them and how you move with them, right?
Yes.
I think there's a Nigerian proverb that I really like, which speaks to the importance of sort of us coming together and collaboration. It says, if the right hand washes the left, then the left hand also washes the right, and both hands become clean. So you have to have both the left and the right coming together in order for cleanliness to happen. So it's for me, that's like a call for the collective action that we're really, really needing to have. But we can't have that collective action unless we confront some of the truths and some of the lies that get in the way of us being really genuine about sustainable action. And I say sustainable because we see and have seen for many years a lot of performative, tick the box type of responses as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And I think one of the things that I've noticed with this generation, the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation, is they're much smarter than we were, baby boomers. And they just have arrived in being more aware and saying, okay, no, this isn't making sense. This doesn't seem like it's something that you really committed to. You're just sort of, lip service. We've had too much lip service. And I think that's also a shift that I've been seeing as well. So the legacy of those lies about our history need to be confronted. The sort of ongoing dehumanization of Black and Indigenous bodies and communities, and the harm and the trauma of racism, which is intergenerational. So sometimes you'll hear people saying, well, those issues happened, so long ago. But no, the intergenerational trauma is real. You bring it into each generation if there isn't something that shifts it or changes it.
100%.
So I think those are really important elements.
Yeah.
And, in Canada, we know a lot in Canada about the history of all of this in the US, but we often don't want to speak about it or haven't really spent time learning about it in Canada, right? So I think it's really important for us to understand some of those things, some of those immigrant struggles of marginalization that people have. And the backdrop is very vital because I think it cannot be ignored. So as recently as 1939, which, is not that long ago, the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest court of the land, effectively legalized racial discrimination based on race. Mm-hmm. And it was a wonderful situation of a man by the name of Fred Christie. And Fred Christie was a hockey fan. And so he was the Montreal Canadiens hockey fan. And so he took his buddy to see a finals of the Montreal Canadiens, and they won. And Fred and Christie and his friend were in a tavern called the York Tavern. And they wanted to have a beer to celebrate. So they asked for service, and they were told no, they couldn't serve them because they were Black. So Fred came originally from Jamaica, and there was a very large Caribbean community in Montreal. And they put together their resources and took the case to the Supreme Court of Canada. And that was the result. They said that the merchants had the right to refuse Fred Christie and any other Black person service in the bar. So again, these are things that are part of the backdrop of the story, right? And it's continuing. Recently, as part of the emergency powers that the Ontario government was putting in place in terms of COVID, turned out to be that they were going to be giving police forces extra authority to just stop you and question you about how why you're walking around and all of that. Mm-hmm. But we know from statistics that the people who get stopped are people from marginalized communities. Black, brown, and Indigenous communities are the ones that currently get stopped by the police. So again, it was like, are we not learning the lessons? Are we not understanding that puts us at risk when we suggest that? In fairness to the government, they did withdraw it. But the fact that at this moment, still, we're not understanding these things is problematic.
Well, I agree. It is problematic. And I think it's even bigger. Like it shows up discrimination shows up in a lot of different ways. And, you and I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, and it's that, to your point, it's generations of this embodied, right? Within our lifestyles, within our families. And it's how we start to make those shifts. And the younger generation is way better. Like, your daughter Akila, who I know very well, like she's amazing and is very good about asking those questions in a way that make you think without it coming across as confrontational, which is phenomenal. But where I'm curious is we have so much work to do. It's not even funny in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And many people want to become allies. So how do we start? How do we become allies? And you had said to me earlier that the system is set up to serve particular demographics, and more specifically, the white man. So yes. How do we get better at being allies and bringing that to people's attention so they even recognize that they're doing it? Because I see it even when we're having conversations about COVID and vaccine. People are being discriminated against if you get the vaccine. People are being discriminated if you don't get the vaccine. And that is not the same as what's been happening for, different communities like the Black community, the Indigenous community. But there's still that systemic belief inside. So where do we go?
Well, the thing about it is it's very complex. So let's just start with even the concept of what is an ally, right? A lot of people use that word, but and really not quite sure. I suppose they're thinking that they want to somehow help in some ways, but you can't help unless you know. And then if you don't know, if you don't educate yourself, and if you don't know the background, if you don't understand the complexities of, this system, then it makes it really, really hard. So a definition of allyship, it's making the commitment to recognize that you have privilege. And then you work with marginalized and oppressed communities to create opportunities and access to those structures for change. But you also have to be prepared to, in a sense, to give up participating in the system, even though you may benefit from it. Because that's what people are always worried about. They know at some level that they're benefiting from this, but they pretend that they're not. And then we get into the issue of questioning whether or not there is even privilege. Now, you see, the issue is that we need to understand and acknowledge that we all have privilege, right? I have privilege because I have a voice and I'm educated. I'm a woman, and I'm older, so I, have some privilege and some, in certain societies, those things are valued, okay? But, a lot of people don't want to understand, they don't want to accept, they don't want to acknowledge that they have privilege. And really, it's sort of, when it's unacknowledged, often it's unacknowledged, the privilege. And it's benefits that people enjoy. They may not have asked for them, but they're still enjoying it, even if you don't ask for it, right? And it's rights given to groups beyond the advantages of most other people. So some examples of privilege: class privilege. People with class privilege, particularly during the COVID crisis or COVID world, for example, if you have a vehicle, you have a car and you don't have to take public transportation, that's an example of class privilege. You're safer. You can isolate yourself a little more. If you have to go and do errands, you don't have to worry about, being on public transit in a bus that's crowded, right? So that's an example, of class privilege. You may have a safe and reliable place to live and work. So you may not have to leave your home as much as possible, and your home is safe. You may have an extra bathroom if someone got sick, so that you could isolate. Those are examples of class privilege. Then we have male masculine privilege, for example. Many men do not understand women's concern about safety, because they don't ever have to worry about, they can just go anywhere alone at any time for the most part. Right? And they don't have to worry about that, and they don't fear for their safety. So that's an example of male masculine privilege, right? But you say that to someone and they kind of don't understand that. Then we have like white race ethnicity privilege, right? So if you're white, you can expect to go to places. You go to a new city, you want to get your hair done. You can pretty well walk into any salon and get your hair done. So you see my little, wonderful little, knots today. You think I can walk into any salon, even in places like Toronto, and get my hair done, right? Again, that's race privilege. You can also walk into an office or a conference or a workshop, and probably most of the people are going to look like you, right? So you don't have to worry about, your race and your ethnicity, or be concerned about that. And likely, the people who are in leadership roles are going to look like you if you're white. So those are examples. Cisgender, like if you don't ever have to worry about being born in a body that doesn't feel right, again, that's privilege. Mm-hmm. But we often don't want to understand or accept those privileges. Able-bodied people, another privilege, right? I can assume if I'm able-bodied that I can go shopping and I will probably be able to navigate the space. If I'm in a wheelchair, that's all. You have to plan that out. You have to think about it. You have to, figure out how that's all going to work. So these are some of the ways in which that privilege prevents us from really understanding that there is a system that has been beautifully curated to serve a very small percentage of people.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really great point. And we don't always recognize that unless we know someone. So I remember Akila saying to me at one point, like, she's a professional, she's gorgeous. And she said to me, it's very interesting when we go out to dinner and even looking for a reservation, she said, we always dress a certain way so that we're seen a certain way. Yes. And a lot of times I think we take that for granted. Yes. And even the disability from your comment there, until you've walked in those shoes, you don't realize how the systems are even created. So how do we get better at having those courageous conversations and let's humanizing? Because that's really what it is. Because it shouldn't matter what color, what religion, what our age is, what our gender is. How do we start to have some of those courageous conversations?
Well, I think what we still need to, so I think organizations need to start those conversations, because all of the things that I just described, people need to be aware of. But I think that we, even if we're non-white, if we're indigenous, if we're women, we are still operating from this sort of cultural value system of the white supremacy culture. And I think we need to understand some of the daily practices and things that this culture, we're just doing without recognizing. So I'll give you an example. It's this either or thinking. So you're either racist or you're not racist. It's much more complex than that. You need to be anti-racist, not racist or not racist. So so here's an example right now operating in the world with what's going on in Israel. You know, it's either you support Israel or you support the Palestine. There's no in between. That hasn't been working. Israel has been around since 1948. Something needs to be turned upside down to figure out how we do this. But this either or thinking and seeing incidents of inequity or situations as isolated incidents that, you know, people are either doing this or either doing that, doesn't help us. What we want to be able to do is we need to understand that people are intersectional. So I am Black. I was married to a Jewish man. I have children who identify as Black Jews. One of them has with another partner has started a nonprofit, the apple doesn't fall from a tree, advocacy group who are talking about how to integrate people, Jews of color, into the mainstream Jewish organizations and structures. So again, it's not simple. It's, you know, I'm not just a Black woman. I come with all kinds of intersectionalities, and my life is lived in diversity. And so we often just want to have little boxes, and it's simple for us to say, oh, well, Vicky is a white woman and she is an entrepreneur, and that's all we know about her. We don't know about your Southern past and how that, or Southern history and how that has shaped you. We need to know that. So that's what I'm saying. We need to spend time with that, and in those conversations, be mindful of that complexity in each of the people that are sitting in the circle. Yeah. For us to be able to have those conversations. We need to think about the way we hoard power. We're always thinking of scarcity as opposed to abundance when it comes to power.
So true. Oh my gosh, yes. You see that all the time. And especially what we've just gone through the last 4 years in the US in particular. I mean, but even now in Canada, it's the same thing. It's very much about scarcity, not abundance. Sorry, yeah. You hit a nerve there. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing, these are some of the other things that we're very comfortable with, for example. So with this real comfort with predominantly white leadership, male white leadership. Yes, we have made some progress with women in more leadership roles, but again, that progress has not been equitable. It's been mainly white women who have been promoted into leadership as opposed to women of color, indigenous, and Black women. So again, that comfort comes with us not understanding that if we have people at leadership roles or levels, in leadership roles and levels in organizations, then the lens that they bring, the lens of their lived experiences, will help us broaden policies, broaden approaches, and not do things that really don't make any sense. So, in my reading recently, last night, in fact, I came across this article from the Kitchener-Waterloo Police Force. And I used to live in Kitchener-Waterloo. Both my daughters were born in Kitchener-Waterloo. So my heart is in there. I went to Wilfrid Laurier University. And so they have been having, of course, the police department has been having some issues with communities of color, and the same issues of over-policing, not understanding about the level of force that they use towards Black communities and brown communities, indigenous communities. And so they decided, without consulting any of these communities who have been trying to give them guidance for years now, they decided that they were going to create these diversity cruisers. So they decided to paint images of African women in headdresses, people, a Sikh man in his headdress on the cruisers. Now I'm thinking, I can't really believe this is actually happening, but it's a perfect example of not collaborating, not understanding that this is, you have resources around you, but you don't utilize them. You think that you know better than the communities you're serving how to help and how to assist. They refuse to have the meetings and the discussions around those issues that I just mentioned that people have brought up. But they're going to put money into getting cruisers that look like diversity cruisers. I'm not sure if you are a diverse person, you're supposed to stop that cruiser, and if that cruiser will be, if it doesn't stop for you, it's mind-boggling, right? When you think about it, unbelievable in 2021. So those are the kinds of things that we have to be aware of, because we're thinking that they think that their leadership is the only one that knows about how to solve this problem, without consulting the people who are most impacted by that problem.
Yeah, well, and I would say that's true in all leadership, no matter what the demographics are within an organization. Like I coach on that all the time, and I see that all the time. And I'm constantly having those conversations with leaders to say, how have you engaged your teams? How have you gotten your teams to help be the solve, instead of you dictating what the solve is, and then the team saying, well, that doesn't work, right? And
Yes.
and it happens, the intentions are well-meaning, I think, for the most part, but they're not understanding what the impact is. And to your point earlier, something you said, it's that singular focus of how does it benefit me? And so until we get past that, we're missing this opportunity to really tap into a wealth of knowledge and sharing that could take something that's good and make it great.
Yeah.
And it's because it is like beating your head against the wall, right? Trying to move that so that people start to open up and see people, see them as human beings, instead of the color, the religion, the sex that they are.
Yeah. So when I do my courageous conversations, I'm focusing on what I describe as sort of like individual relational change. Because to me, yes, the systemic piece is very, very important and very critical, but it's the people behind that who are creating these systems that we also have to have them unpack individually your own biases. Like, what are your own biases? I used to be in HR in another life, and I know that one of my biases, when a candidate came in that was extremely obese or overly obese, all of a sudden I'm thinking, I'm not even listening to the person, because I'm thinking, oh my God, our health plan is going to go up if we have somebody who is really overly obese. Maybe they're going to get sick, maybe they're not going to be as efficient, those types of things. So that's something I had to work on, because I came from a family of nurses who were always, about health and well-being. And I think, well, are they going to be good critical thinkers if if their health is compromised by their weight, all of those things. So we all have biases, but we need to just be mindful and address them and acknowledge them, and then move to action in a way that is helpful. But often we don't do that. We do a lot of sort of equity washing, really, where we kind of go into the sense of color blindness, and having these lofty statements of things we're going to do, but then we don't enact them because we don't have the processes involved. We don't have the people involved in our organizations who can help us with that. And the thing is, we don't also want to use people of color and Indigenous people, to do the work. We want everyone to be involved with the work, but we also want to bring in consultants and people who can do the work. It's not up to us to fix the problem that is created by white supremacy, values and culture, right?
So let me ask you a question, because you just brought up something there that I think is a really key point. You're highly aware, and you've spent your whole life studying people, psychology of people, being better understanding of what are some of those biases. How do you help that person who has no idea? So what if it was just a typical HR person, and that same scenario you just used, and they don't even recognize that they're having those biases? Because to me, that's really more of the root of how do you begin to see and be aware that you have those biases?
Well, one of the most wonderful things about technology these days is that we all have access to information, right? And so I get really tired of when people say, well, help us understand. Okay, no problem. We'll help you understand, but you need to do the work. So there's lots of literature, there's lots of resources, you need to educate yourself around these things. Fortunately, many companies and organizations are also, putting resources into that so that people can begin to understand these things. I'm going to be starting a project, this coming week with a big architectural firm, and it's wonderful because architecture is a major piece of our life. We're building communities, we build, beauty, and it has to come through the lens of everyone and supported by that. So I think there are lots of opportunities for us to learn. If you have colleagues in your, the one thing I find when it comes to race, we have this real fear about speaking about race. And I like the idea that, we think that somehow it's so challenging. But if we were only to just be curious and ask questions, not questions like, where are you from? But just, just like, it's like, I tell you what I had for breakfast, and maybe it's something different than what you have. Then you ask more questions. And then you get to know me, but those are the earlier questions about me as a person and a human, as opposed to me being from somewhere else, making those assumptions. So I think that we have lots of opportunities. There is incredible resource material out there for us to educate ourselves. We will learn over the pandemic to bake gorgeous cheesecakes. It's more challenging to those skills than it is to just spend time getting to know someone. And I think it's that human piece that we sometimes somehow we feel like that has to have some specific matrix, which no, it's just, it's I'm a human being, and people of color, people who look different from you are also human. We have the same concerns. We worry about our children. We worry about, our resources. We want them to be educated. We want them to be safe. We want to have grandchildren. All of those things. So again, just, abandon that fear and just be curious. I think that curiosity is a really important piece that we often don't engage in.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm a big fan of curiosity. And I know it when you and I spoke earlier, we spent some time really talking about how we humanize conversations. How do we become more interested? And one of the things I have found in COVID is definitely, there's this time more for getting to know someone more intimately, right?
Yes.
Because we're not passing in the hallways, we're not rushing to get to the next meeting. When you're engaging in a call like this, you actually have the opportunity to get to know more about someone, which makes a big difference. But we should be doing that all the time, because you don't know what that other person is living with or going through. Because everybody puts on that face that they want to make everything seem okay. And if you don't ask those questions, they're not going to come forward and tell you what they're dealing with, whether it's mental health, a disability, a sick child, discrimination, whatever it may be. We all have something going on.
Yes. And I think that's where, leadership comes in terms of managers really doing an assessment on a regular basis about how people are managing their lives and what can they do to support people during these times, and especially remote workers, women who are now, working from home, but also educating their children. And I'm in many companies where people say that it feels like business as usual. It isn't business as usual. How could it possibly be business as usual with all that's been going on? People caring for others, and people worrying about being sick, levels of anxiety and depression, all of those things. But yet, there are still expectations of productivity being similar. Have we checked to see what people's home life is like? Do they have space to have an office? All of these types of things. And that's where the human piece of leadership comes in, and the same lens can be put towards creating organizations where people are, it's not just diverse in terms of optics, but there is a sense of inclusion and a feeling of belonging in those organizations. We're not, people from communities of color are not interested in coming into organizations to assimilate. We are coming in to bring our authentic selves and our lived experiences, which is a bigger currency than all of our degrees and anything else that we may have. So you're getting actually double, double for your price, so to speak.
More for your money.
Yeah, so I think that we need to get away from the abstraction and really get back to the humanity of people. I remember when I was 19 years old, my girlfriend and I, we went to Quebec City, and we were on a summer tour, and we were staying in youth hostels. And we were in a youth hostel in Quebec City, and we had to share a space with this white couple who were from South Africa. And this would have been in 1976. So apartheid was everywhere there and whatever. And my friend Angela, we spent about 15 minutes discussing how we could get out of having to share this room with this white South African couple. What could we do? What kind of excuses we could come up with? And so then I said, Angela, it's only a night. Why don't we just, stay in the same space? We got our own sleeping bags. There's security around. They're not going to murder us, And so we did. We introduced ourselves, they introduced themselves, and we realized on their side, they also had the same anxieties. And so we had the most wonderful evening of talking about our lives and them sharing about their experiences in South Africa, our experiences here. And I remember staying in touch with that couple for about a decade. So again, it's humanity, kind of connecting to her humanity and having space for people to share, to care. You don't forgive them. I mean, they were traveling because they wanted to see what life was like outside of that toxic, incredibly inhumane country's situation. I think at some level they understood that they were complicit with it, and their families were, and they were benefiting from it. But they were at least trying to understand what it was like outside of that. And to me, that's, we have to give people a starting point for that. Yeah, I think absolutely. That sometimes we're in this sort of period now of canceling people. And sometimes I think cultures need to be canceled, or elements of cultures need to be canceled. So, white supremacy behaviors and actions need to be canceled, because that's not culture that benefits anyone. Mm-hmm. But then we have so many other situations where sometimes we are rushing to judgment about people and their responsibilities or their actions as well, So I think there's just a lot for us to unpack as humans. And I think we do need to focus a little more on starting from, a place of compassion and listening and dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you just brought up something there that, I think it's really important. And maybe you can share more about the cancel culture and share what that, means, because I know, you and I talked about the centering of voices. So maybe just spend a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah, so I think that there are kind of two elements to cancel culture, and then I'll talk a little bit about, how people may feel about centering of voices and not understanding that. So recently, here's a very real situation. A filmmaker by the name of Michelle Latimer. She, in fact, I think I sent you the link for that article in the Globe and Mail about her. So she was, claimed to be a Métis Indigenous woman roots, and she was doing some amazing work at the CBC. Her documentaries and her films were doing really well. And then some situation came up about whether her identity and her was real. And instead of doing a thorough investigation and, finding out, they basically just canceled the show. The show had been up for some awards and, just a whole series of things that have happened. And it turns out when she did eventually take time and had some independent people verify her status, that it was indeed real. She had stories from her grandfather over the years. So again, this is where we see sometimes organizations, they're, in their efforts to be, as they might describe it, as woke and fearing backlash, they jump to conclusions and assumptions too early without really, acknowledging things. And really, people need to, they know their own identities and they should be, understood and acknowledged before we jump to those conclusions. So again, her whole reputation and her career has been put on hold.
Yeah, right? And you can't undo that, right? Because the doubt was already put in people's minds.
Yes.
And going back and saying, oh, yes, actually, now that the due diligence has been done, we do know that she was telling the truth. The story doesn't fix the problem.
Yeah, and then we have, cancel culture, particularly amongst white, men who, they feel that, like some of the politicians in the U.S., the Republican politicians in the U.S. who talk about, being canceled, but really they're, the version of cancel culture is that they go from one mainstream to the right, media. They're not canceled. They are just given different platforms, and their views on these issues are still being pushed as part of that white supremacist culture, which harms people. And so they will pull out cancel culture, and they'll kind of determine that books like Dr. Seuss shouldn't be continue to that we shouldn't stop publishing racist material and all of those things. So there's this, here we have this dichotomy between the left and the right, around what cancel culture is. And often when people are sort of canceled because they may have done something that was harmful, within a matter of months or years, they're back on some TV show or they're making, money. And so there is, even interesting enough, in my view, inequality within cancel culture.
Yeah.
Playing itself out.
Yeah.
Michelle being an example of that, and then some of the other people who have benefited from having a platform to espouse views that are clearly harmful, and that whole debate around free speech. Speech has a responsibility and an accountability as well. It's not just that you can just say and do anything that is harmful to people. Yeah. So I think that cancel culture piece is something that really we need to be really mindful of.
Beautiful. So before I open it up to our audience for some questions, what would be maybe 2 things that you think we could be doing that could make a difference on a daily basis?
Let's see. I think it's important for us to learn to sit with discomfort. I feel like even in the point of view of people rushing to be allies, I think oftentimes when we really take time to reflect on our privilege, reflect on our role in the upholding of this culture, right, from the values and privilege, we become uncomfortable. And I think we want to rush to doing things and helping and having all these intentional pieces. But I think we need to spend more time sitting in that discomfort, getting curious, asking questions of yourself, and spend time in that recollection. I also think it's important for people to find ways to amplify the voices of those who are not often heard and listened to and or acknowledged. Now, so the piece that I am going to come back to now is I feel like right now there's been a memo sent out that says we need to amplify the voices of people of color and Indigenous people and people who are marginalized. Therefore, white people have taken the backseat and they say very little. And so they don't participate in the process anymore because they feel that they're giving space. But in that process, they're also not taking any responsibility or accountability for how things are going to unfold and how we can collectively provide solutions. So that's a very interesting piece in terms of behavioral actions that I'm seeing. So I've had to be really kind of really straight up around, okay, you still have a responsibility. It's not giving over responsibility. It's making sure that there is that. It's the same with, men and women at a board table, right?
Yeah.
Men take the space if they're allowed, and they often do.
Yes, they do.
So again, we need to hear from everyone around the table. And that's really what we're talking about. It's not like, oh, well, now it's for them to fix it.
Yeah.
No, we are tired, we're exhausted, we need that support, but again, it has to be amplification. And I think also to understand your own privilege in ignoring racism. You can go home today and not worry about it, and you can come back in when you feel like it, be an ally on Wednesday and maybe not on Friday. That's a privilege, to be able. So I think people need to be aware of that and to just be cognizant of how that might be. And I think we also need to speak out, and when you see racism in action, even if you are not sure what to do, and you see someone being attacked or being harassed, you need to find someone who can help you. You shouldn't ignore the circumstances or turn a blind eye to that. I think it's important for us to act on those things.
Okay, very nice. And I was just going to add to that. I think part of that too is acts of kindness, no matter who it is or what it is. Like, I had a conversation the other day with someone, and I said, it doesn't cost you anything to smile, to say hello, because
Yes.
you don't know what that impact will have on someone. And so, being inclusive and including someone, not being afraid that, you're going to just be a good person, be human.
Yeah, and I think people need to move, from sort of a fear zone when we're dealing about these issues into more of a learning zone, and then eventually maybe a growth zone. So an example of a growth zone would be, I don't let mistakes, like worry about making a mistake, hold me back from having a conversation or asking a question or trying to understand. Then that would be more helpful than just sort of being in a fear zone where you basically are denying that racism is a problem. You're still having a debate about whether people have differing opportunities in this world. We know that it isn't equal. And opportunities and networks are how people get ahead. And that's part of the systemic process of intergenerational wealth. So here's a wonderful example of how in the US, we missed the mark of providing intergenerational wealth, so that now we have a wealth gap between Black people and white people. And it was after the war, the GI Bill provided free education and free housing loans for men returning. It was mainly men at that time, returning from the war. In Black communities, they had a quota on the number of people that could be educated. In terms of housing loans, they only created a zone of areas in communities where the housing loan would be given. And in the Black communities, it was very narrow. So white soldiers were able to go to college and university for free. They were able to get very cheap loans for housing, and that's what created intergenerational wealth. So those same, servicemen had careers now. They were able to they had a home, and then the next generation, they could take out a loan to pay for their children to go to college. That's an example of systemic racism that is based on race and how the inequality of that gift. But remember, those Black soldiers served in the war, and they did everything, and they were killed, they were murdered, they were heroes. But yet when they came home, that systemic barrier of that GI Bill created the inequalities in intergenerational wealth.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And yes, definitely a large example of, what happens in our world. It's not in the US only, it's in our world that this happens. So I'd like to open it up to our audience. We're about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. So if you guys would like to turn on your videos and if you have questions, please feel free. We've got Sybil for a couple more minutes that we'll be able to do that. And just turn your mutes off if you would, please. I see Kathy moved inside. So what questions do we have, ladies?
Hi, it's Athena. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hi, Athena.
Thank you so much, Sybil. Just wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I'm a big believer in kindness, and I think that is the first step to anything, of any connection with human beings and humanity. So my question is, and you mentioned a lot of resources, and I believe, yep, we have access, but I would love for you to tell me what, or all of us, what books or book, maybe start with your top, I'm sure you could give us a ton in the chat, but that you would recommend for all of us who may not look like you, and that we should read. And I did a event, so while you're thinking quickly, I did an event on ending racism, a panel event with my organization in the summer, in August, and I'm in Chicago and there's a lot of unrest. And it was sold out, and I got compliments and thank you. And I also got some not so nice notes. And so my response back was, thank you so much for sharing. You are right. I do not know. My purpose is to create awareness. And everyone that was on the panel didn't look like me. Okay. So, and these people were some badass women. I mean, ACLU, they were lawyers. It was great. But I asked for feedback. And so, you know what I did? I sent them a list of 12 books to read that I read before, so that I could understand. And I still know I have empathy. So I would love one thing I should do and read. And thank you again.
Yeah, wonderful. Athena, I think there's a book by Layla Syed called Me and White Supremacy. And it also has a wonderful workbook. To me, that's a really good foundational book to start with. And to contrast that is another book called White Fragility by D'Angelo. And you will see the contrast in how Robin DiAngelo is a white woman, and then Layla Syed is a woman of color. So I think I always suggest to people that they kind of research and read those and sort of see the contrast and see how the lens of a white woman, even the title White Fragility is very interesting, because it suggests that, white people, when it comes to race, oh my God, you have to go so gingerly and they might fall apart. And when they fall apart, you have to try to fix them and put them together, which again is part of how white people can distance themselves from this and use it as a distraction. So but then Layla, she is very clear about how we need to take responsibility. These are things you need to be doing. So those are two that I would suggest as a starting point for reading. There's also a lot of really good documentaries and videos as well. There's one called 13, which talks about the 13th Amendment in the US, and it really speaks to sort of the whole issue around the pipeline to prison and how we've kind of curated that as a way of getting Black men out of families and communities in the US. In Canada, we also, CBC has just started. Has just started a whole collection of work on Canadian, interest. And there's one wonderful documentary called Africville, which speaks about the destruction of a Black community in Nova Scotia. And that speaks to all of the things that we just talked about this morning, how there was no consultation with the community. The area where the Africville was situated had become valuable in Halifax, and they really wanted the land. And so they destroyed the community by not providing things like water and sewage. So Africville and CBC, their Black history channel is really excellent.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'm familiar with both of the books, and I have read them, and I have to laugh at some of the stuff I can understand. But I laughed, and then I was ashamed, but I still laughed because I get it. I get what I didn't get, if that makes any sense. But 13, thank you. I don't know any of these documentaries. I haven't heard anything about them. So, and it's always good to refresh and to remind people, I'll use your name of this woman recommended these books. Coming from you, it'll mean a lot more than coming from me. And okay, great, thank you. I would love to watch those documentaries, and I have them on my list. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, and I can also provide Vicki with a short list of some other things as well, which she can then send out to her group.
Actually, that would be phenomenal, Sybil, because we'll add that to because we will be sending the podcast out to those that registered but weren't able to join today, but being able to send them some resources. And actually, yes, Sheila had shared 13th Amendment with me, and it was mind blowing. I couldn't believe it. So that would be phenomenal. Thank you, and thanks for that question, Athena. Any other questions, real quick, before we wrap up? Just want to make sure I catch all the questions if there's any others.
I just want to thank Sybil for being here on this platform. I've learned a lot. It's opened my mind up in different ways. As a white privileged person with no education and a mental health issue that has been judged even internally within my own family structure, she has really inspired me to have a voice in my own home. And how I can bring in some of this stuff to teach my 13-year-old son and possibly some of my relatives.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Catherine, because it's that teach the children well. That's really what we need to be doing, because the children come with open blank slates, right?
Yeah.
And we fill it up with the things that we value.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Kathy. So I just have a little song here I'll play in the background while I'm thanking Sybil. Sybil, seriously, I am so grateful for you and for sharing with us courageous conversations and helping us to become better human beings. And like Athena, kindness goes a long way. So it's, how do you include someone and make them part of the circle instead of putting them outside that circle? So thank you. Again, I'm very grateful. I just remind everyone that the podcast will be on Apple, Spotify, any of the podcast platforms. So if there's someone you know of in your life that would benefit from hearing this conversation, please do share it with them. It's Women in Leadership Talk, or WIL Talk. And again, Sybil, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you, Vicki, too, for being a role model for elevating voices of color.
Thank you. All right, everyone, have a super week. And Sybil, I will speak with you very soon. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.